right, so Mike, thanks for putting this together today. Just for anybody who doesn't know, Mike is our resident AI, machine learning, security, programming expert guy, aware of many hats at CCG, and I'm sort of like the friendly. I've been called a power user of AI, but I look at myself as sort of an AI Neanderthal. So Mike's probably tired of me constantly bugging him with elementary school questions. Um, but he's a good sport about it, and he gave us a little bit of time today just to kind of see if we can scratch his brain and ultimately talk about a lot of the things we're hearing from the marketplace, from our clients, just from sort of being in the business. We're looking at trends, and so we thought it'd be a good opportunity just to have a quick informal chat today, right, Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. I want to say we were talking earlier. I had a conversation, and something that you said to me actually had a lot of weight. You said that you think you are able to handle more accounts and be more up to date on more accounts today than you ever have been because you are a big user of AI. Would you agree?
Yeah,
right.
It's a secret,
and I would call
superpower.
I would call you an AI power user for sure, because you really get it. You really get how to use it. You see the use cases, and you yourself in your everyday job and your activities, you're using it all the time to keep you up to date. And so to me, I think it's perfect to have that conversation. And I know one of the questions we were asked, we get a lot, right, is what is AI? So I think today we're focusing mostly, at least, on starting with what is chat versus what is agentic. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, because really I think we've been able to leverage this toolkit to the degree that we are able, because really of a lot of the work you've done with our organization and setting up all of our various AI related tools. To your point, makes us a lot more dangerous. It allows us to analyze and ultimately be very quick with responses back to clients, and just helping them sort of go through all of the various steps in an IT procurement evaluation. So it's certainly helped us be more dangerous. And I think as more customers see how we're leveraging these tools, the natural questions are like, okay, well, we have an edict from the board or from senior leadership that we need to start putting some of these things in use ourselves. And so we're starting to get a lot of kind of organic conversations going that way. And to your point, maybe you can expand on this. AI seems like a massive umbrella. Every company that puts out a service or product has now AIized it, if you will. And so everybody's sort of headed towards the direction of how can we, make something a marketable service or tool. And to me, it's like sometimes it's easier just to maybe start from first principles. When we say AI, and you mentioned chat versus agentic, can you maybe share a couple of thoughts around what separates those two nomenclatures and how both of those various elements of AI are used in businesses?
Thanks for that question, Tyler. Yeah, there is the two main pieces that we're really using what most people consider AI. And you got to remember, AI is a science, and there's a lot of pieces that most people don't see. But I think general public now, what we're talking about is we're talking about two. And they're both based on a technology that is called, of course, a large language model, or an LLM, or and when we say that, there's all kinds of versions. There's gigantic ones and there's small ones. We all refer to them as a language model. That's where we get the GPT sentence for chat, for OpenAI's Chat GPT. It stands for General Pre-trained Model. And what that means is we've taken data, and instead of it being a model that, say, is learning on the fly, we have taken data and we have pre-trained a model on that data, and then we can use it to synthesize answers. And so that's largely what we are when people are talking about AI. That's largely what we're talking about. And so it's Google Gemini and ChatGPT and Anthropic Claude and all those various pieces. And I think we're almost familiar with what chat is. I don't think, however, that we know how to properly utilize chat to its fullest. So when we think of chat, we think about it just like having a conversation with the computer, right? You're typing in a question or a comment or something we call a prompt, and then it thinks for a while and it produces an answer. And so this is really language based, but you can use it for so many other reasons. And one of the things that you can do with it is you can give it data to back all that up. So I could give it a bunch of files in my English language, maybe that I found on the web, or maybe my notes from from speaking engagements I've done, or even just chats I've had with, actual people. I could maybe put in some of my research papers that I've done and written, patents, things like that, into the model, and then it can actually use those as part of its memory, so to speak. So then I could ask it, give me an idea of the technologies that I've been involved in my career, and it would actually use those documents, search those documents, go through all that language, and produce answers for me. And this is really the power of chat. And then beyond that, we also have the ability to focus the model on what we want it to. And so when we use the term model, we're actually talking about one of these LLMs. That is actually doing all the processing, or as we call it, inference. It's the one that's saying, given a prompt, I'll give you an answer back through the synthesized language that it knows. And so by giving it a lot of extra data to act as a memory for it, and to give it a very selective and well done prompt that focuses it on what you want, is really the key to using chat. And then, I'm going to ask you, you say you use it every day. I use it every day too. I use it for coding. I use it to do a lot of, to summarize research and things like that. Instead of reading a 65-page research paper now, I can drop it into an LLM and say, okay, give me a 14-page summary, or give me an 8-page summary, or just say, what is the purpose of this paper? And then I can start to use it to explore that without actually reading the paper itself. But I know, you use it in a very different way. So I think for me, people think about the way I might use it with research, that it's tailored for that, but that's not how you use it. So I think you should talk a little bit about what you use it for a daily basis. And I think that's probably more of a general audience.
So I heard you say three things, Mike. So first one I heard you say was the data. So what data is the model actually referencing or leveraging for your desired output? The second thing I heard you say was model. So what model is appropriate for a given task or set of tasks? And then the third thing I heard you say was prompting. So I remember when I first started looking into LLMs a few years ago, I was so excited about prompt engineering. I thought, well, I'm not a programmer. I didn't ever learn to code. I would kind of miss that train a little bit, but prompt engineering, I kind of got, right away. I figured out, I think I was talking to you earlier, like I realized that I had like totally unmarketable skills, which was like, I can Google better than the average person. So I don't know, you can't put that on a resume, like expert Googler, but prompt engineering kind of came naturally to me. And so I saw this, and this is probably a good place to segue maybe into how we're seeing clients look to leverage this, and ultimately maybe the design inspiration behind what you've put together for a CCG to leverage. But I said, okay, I know how to get a good response out of this. Now, the second question is like, am I using this in a way that is appropriate, right? Like obviously at CCG, we're very focused on security and compliance. We're technology, we're in the technology all day with our clients. So when I saw that essentially what you had set up for us is, effectively a black box that, we're not sending a bunch of information out to some public LLM provider. I don't have to worry about, sharing any kind of trade secrets. Like, this is a private model. Maybe you can talk about what that means here in a minute. But I said, okay, well, I have a whole lot of ideas about how we can leverage this for our clients. And, like a lot of companies, for us, we have an excessive amount of data, right? We're having calls with our clients every day. We're reviewing SOWs from vendors. We're going through contract language. We're doing general research for clients on, based on what their IT strategy looks like, or CX strategy, what's intrinsically relevant for them that they should consider. And so I thought, man, this is an awesome, use case for these models. And so, really, I started setting up effectively like workspaces or almost GPTs on a per client basis. So I said, okay, this is my customer. This is what I know they're generally focused on. This is what good looks like for them from a strategic standpoint. And then I just started feeding our models with essentially all the information that I would typically kind of just keep in SharePoint and look at, kind of peruse. But now I realized I had like essentially a research assistant or a assistant analyst that I could then leverage to put together artifacts and deliverables for clients much, much faster than I was able to do before. And ultimately, human memory is great, but it's also kind of fallible. It's like, I think I remembered somebody saying this on that call, or I think I remembered the client saying this is extremely important to them. man, if you can all of a sudden have, every call transcript you've ever had with a customer that's referenceable by a private model, that becomes a pretty powerful thing just to make sure that we're all on the same track. So that's how I leverage it. And I think broadly, that's how our team leverages it, ultimately just to be more valuable to our customers. And I think we're still talking about chat here. I think that use case is what everybody on the sort of like the enterprise side, they're looking to leverage these LLMs for the same purposes. How can I be more dangerous at my job? How can I be more effective? And then I think that gets the challenge. Like a lot of the IT leaders, they know, like everybody we've talked to, they know that their employees, not only their direct reports, but everybody that are their sort of customers in their business, are all leveraging these models for the same kind of thing I'm using them for. But there's a little bit of exposure there, right? So if somebody has their own private ChatGPT or Gemini license, and they're leveraging this to make themselves more effective in their job, maybe talk for a minute or two about where we see some sort of cautionary flags there.
This is going to be all about data. And we're talking about loading data into these models. You have to think about, and you have to be careful what you do. These are learning systems. And I want everybody to understand that the different companies that are producing these models for the public have different procedures and different methods they do. But the general idea is you take all the data that you want to know, and we're talking about in the trillions of documents and trillions of questions and trillions. So it's a massive amount of data. And you train the model on that, and you kind of then have an APOC date, kind of like, okay, I was last trained, say, September 1st, 2025. And so any events after September 1st, 2025, the model wouldn't know. And so some of the companies are going to say, we'll just do training every 6 months, and that's how we'll keep it up to date. Other companies may say, well, we'll actually have another smaller model that we train every day with the news that occurred or what we want it to know, and we can ask it too. But at the end of the day, these are all learning models. So, when you're using your license, and you have to be really careful about personal license for sure, because they're actually gathering the data from you. So if you take a document, let's say that you've created and you load it into the model, you are essentially giving that company permission to use your data for the model. So let's take somebody like for me, and I'm doing some research, and I want to keep that research myself secret until I'm ready to release it, and I throw it into a public LLM. That is going to be part of their next training run if they so choose to do that. Now, a lot of with the enterprise pieces that are 2 to 3 times expensive, 3 to 4 times probably, they may not have that component built in there that they don't use your data. So that's a premium piece that you pay for. But for a personal, I think if you look at your license very carefully, maybe you can opt out, maybe you can't. Part of maybe having that lower price monthly fee is the fact that they get to use your data. So you do have to be careful. And then you think about something like, the way you're using it. Let's say you're working on some customer's initiative, like their digital transformation, and it is proprietary information for them on how they're going to do it, the technology, or even where they're going. That's something you don't want to put in a language model. If it's one of the companies that do, say, daily training runs with everything they learned yesterday, that may show up, next week in a chat. So you have to be careful with that. So to fully access this, what we've created at CCG is we have our own AI server that's running our own smaller model. So instead of having to have a data center full of GPUs, there's a limited number of us. And using these smaller models, we don't have to have the same hardware. So for a very cost-effective amount per month, we're able to actually run our own models. And then these models are very carefully curated. So you kind of mentioned, Tyler, that certain models are good for certain uses and others are not. So we curate these models for what they're good at, whether they're being fast or creative, or whether they're good at data analysis, or whether they're good at multi-step thinking. And then those models sit on our server. And then as we are purposing our task, whatever it is we want to do, we pick the proper model for that task. And that really lets us get the best of both worlds. So instead of having a one dual gigantuous model for all purposes, we actually have smaller models that are specialists in what we choose them to do. And because it's all private and it's all hosted in our own tenant or our own, it could actually be on-prem equipment as well. you don't have to worry about that data going out. So you can put anything in there you want, and there's no way it's going to leak out or be trained or show up in a search tomorrow or anything like that. So I think that's key to this. And what we are doing is we're leveraging those models to add our own data to produce, as you were saying, I've got my own little research assistant, say, for me, for all my projects. You've got your own research, or maybe you want to think of it like an admin assistant or kind of like a data analysis assistant that lets you go in for each of your different accounts and say, I know where I'm at. I can pick up exactly where I left off, or I had another meeting, I can throw it in there, and now I'm more up to date. And I've seen you use those, and it's very impressive. Some of the things I've seen you use them for instance, to say, I need to put together a 5-slide deck to update this customer on the project. And you're saying, okay, you go to your model and you say, where are we on the so-and-so project? What's the progress made? What are the issues that we're facing? And what are the roadblocks that are in the way? And it helps you put those 5 slides together in like 15 minutes instead of, 2 hours. A huge time saver for you.
But the scope of the data that we have to sort of pour through, I mean, we have 400 plus suppliers in our ecosystem. And so for me to become a subject matter expert on 400 suppliers when I have a client asking me to run an eval is a pretty heavy task. And so for me, it's also, hey, we're going to run an eval for a client, and we have sort of their core criteria. Man, it's a great use case to say, here's our criteria, here's the selection requirements, of this huge database that we have of capabilities for all of the vendors in the ecosystem. Who's the best fit? Give me a top 10 list. Those types of activities. Then you do go back and you add, anecdotal as it might be, the sort of human knowledge, right? Like, hey, we know that these guys work really well with this particular set of requirements, so on and so forth. But it allows us to cut down a lot of that time of just sort of grunt work, and ultimately the polished end artifact is extremely well informed, and we were able to save a ton of time putting it together.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that also leads us a little bit into the data management piece of this, because you don't have highly structured data, and so let's make sure we know what we're talking about. Structured data is what we think about like in a database. I might have tables, and I might have columns or fields, and I have rows of data that match those fields. So in that case, it's data that we know a lot about, and we structure it in such a way to make it easy to use. But most data doesn't come in that. If you think about a transcript from a meeting, it's just a bunch of speakers talking, and there's no structure to it. You actually have to read it to understand what was going on. I think the key to a lot of what the chat models can do, and then we can leverage this in the second that we'll talk about here in a little bit, the agentic as well, is that the data doesn't have to be structured so much. I can do a lot of unstructured pieces of data. I can do chat transcripts. I can do meeting notes. I can do, maybe I sat down and scribbled 25 ideas on my current research project, and some notes. And instead of having to organize those and put them in something that makes it easy for me to restructure and remember, I can just drop it in an LLM, and then it becomes part of that. So the data management side of this is the key is you don't have to have your data as structured as you used to be. But I do want to get into talking about how you can, we're going to transition a little more now into agentic work. And agentic AI is considerably different than a chat. A chat is all about gathering data and then helping you use that data in a more useful way. So it's going to save you a lot of time. Agentic work is more, say, about workflow. If you want to think about having, I have pieces of data and I need to move that through a flow of work to achieve an eventual output. And I think there's a couple of good examples. We have one where we're talking about an HR process where there's a lot of turnaround, and it's not necessarily employees, but it may be, say, customers, or it may be agents, or it may be somebody that is working with your company, and they're there and they come, maybe they do project work and then they're gone and then they're off the books. And you are constantly having to add them and delete them because they don't access your data and they don't have the ability to do that unless they're actually currently part of your process. And so let's just say there's a lot of turnover and turnaround, and the people come and go, and they'll come back and they'll work with you again. And the problem with that is it's like an HR process. I have to add them to the list, and then I have to set up their email, and I have to put them in HR, and I have all these steps that I have to go through, have to verify them, and then I have to send them an email and welcome them again, and all these things. And then when they leave, I have a termination process that does the same thing. So think about all the data they access, maybe the databases they log into, the applications, all of those things have to be handled. And so it's a lot of work for somebody to go out and do that. I had a great reference one time as I had a customer that said, well, I've got this process that only takes about 5 to 10 minutes. But, I have people that do that 20 times a day. And not only do I have people doing that 20 times a day, I actually have 50 different employees doing that. So by the time you add all that time up, they're spending a huge amount of time a day doing this small task. And that's where agentic work comes in. So I could actually have agentic bot, and its goal would be, let's say when you enter a new agent employee, whatever it is you're doing in your HR system, let's say, it's going to do all that work for you. It's going to go out and add the email to the email system. It's going to go out and send them that welcome email. It's going to add them to HR. It's going to add them to all the applications and pieces like that. So this is just a lot of steps in a process that you have to go through. And you can leverage an AI. People have called this workflow automation, which we've had for a long time, but this is slightly different in those terms. And a good example is the second we were talking about. Maybe you have you're routing trucks. You're a transport company and you're routing trucks, and it's a matter of picking up this load here and taking the best route to get it here on time to get the most money based on speed. Truck capabilities, truck size, what can it carry? Is it a flatbed? Is it closed? Is it a refrigerated truck? Those sort of things. But on top of that, let's say you've got a truck driver and he's reporting in, hey, boy, visibility is getting horrible here due to the weather. What he's telling you is maybe this is not a good route to be on, but he may even be talking about terms of snow or a blizzard or something he's running into, but he doesn't actually use those terms. That's when the LLM can come in and kind of, I guess the way to say is make that all uniform. Whether he says I'm running into a blizzard, or I can't see because of snow, or the weather's really bad, I'm having visibility issues, or I can't see more than 30 feet in front of my truck. These are all ways to say the same thing that an LLM can say, I know exactly what you're saying, even though you've chosen one of the 700 different ways to say it. And so leveraging that in agentic work as well. And I know you have actually worked with some customers and have ran into some examples of this as well.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, because process automation is not new. There's been process automation tools and platforms for a long time, and a lot of enterprises have invested heavily in those. But I think what you just touched on is one of the major benefits of this sort of agentic agentic model that we're talking about, which is it's not deterministic insofar as you don't have to have the same input every single time to generate the same output. You can have a whole plethora of inputs that are sort of directionally all saying the same thing. And the benefit of an LLM that's being deployed in an agentic fashion is that it doesn't really matter that those inputs are not uniform.
Right. And the other key thing that we can do here. So if you think about this as a workflow, the way these work is think about it like a flow chart, right? I've got an input, and then I have 4 different boxes that have to do the 4 different jobs, and so forth and so on. And a lot of it could be also, hey, I tried to add the email using this particular email name, and the thing came back to me and told me that username already existed. Well, it's really easy to get the LLM to just say, well, then just give me another one that works, first name, last name, first name, initials. It can do all that work on its own. And it can also help you make decisions. I think a great example of that is, let's say that I am that trucking company and I'm going through all the available loads. And some of these might say, stuff like bananas or onions or canned goods. So we know that's all a category of food. But we have to realize, well, bananas are different than canned goods, because I can just put canned goods in any old truck, but bananas, maybe I have to have a refrigerated truck. So you could actually ask it to make a decision. You could actually say in your workflow, okay, now I have the 15 available loads for me. I have a refrigerated truck. Which is the best load for me based on, say, the criteria? I've got a refrigerated truck, something that needs refrigeration. What is paying me the most, and what is the shortest route for me so I can pick up another load? It can actually make those decisions for you as one of those decision-making nodes in your workflow. So in the past, that would have been a lot of, if then
Yeah.
logic. If I have a refrigerated truck and it is this and it is of this size and so forth. And that was a very rigid and brittle way to do it, because as soon as one of those breaks, you lose your load. But in this case, it's actually the LLM able to use reasoning and some logic in the best to say, the bananas are your best load because it's a short run, you are a refrigerated truck, and it pays more than all the others. That's the sort of thing you can actually use an LLM agentically as well.
All right. So I have in my mind this sort of picture of a bunch of boxes and steps along the way of this workflow that we're talking about. And I know that a lot of companies that we talk to, seems like these sort of more progressive IT leaders that are definitely technology guys and gals are almost kind of skipping straight to, I want to automate these processes, and maybe sometimes leapfrogging over some of the chat stuff we talked about, but we'll maybe kind of leave that there for a second. So I have this idea, this image of the workflow that I'm automating. Now, you mentioned in the first part of our conversation earlier today, I know this is something we talk about a lot offline, is sort of prompt engineering. And so, the importance and the significance of having the right prompt for the right desired outcome. I'm guessing, but maybe you can correct me, but I'm guessing that becomes as relevant or more relevant as we're kind of breaking this up into bite-sized pieces in this agentic workflow.
And I think you're spot on there. It is an important question, and we'll go a little bit in what is necessary for agentic work. Okay, this is a little bit different. I'll also kind of get into a little bit about deployment and how you might manage some of this as well. So in that case, yes, it is. It's going to be like one of these boxes in your workflow, and you got to think of it as a really smart box. And so when you're talking about prompt engineering, I think one of the things that we run into, and I love this is something that just I have to think about all the time. So, I have a couple of kids in schools, and the teachers are all about not using AI to do any of their homework, which, they're at this point, they're 14 years old. These kids are going to be using AI left and right every day of their life. So for them to know how to use it properly, I think is very important. So I really don't like that decision. But when I ask the teachers about it, here's what they say. They say, well, AI is wrong. It doesn't give the correct answer. And we call those hallucinations, right? Like an AI, an LLM. A great example is, as an author, I actually use LLMs a lot to help me keep track of where I am in books. I can ask about characters or situations, or did this character do that, or things like that. And what I have an example in some of the teaching I do where I say, okay, I've got a book, and here's the 15 characters. There is no George in the book. But if I ask the LLM, say, hey, what was the last thing that George was talking to Frank about? And it'll make something up and say, well, George and Frank were talking about this, even though there's no George in the book. And that would be a hallucination. I didn't prompt it properly. One of the things that I want to say that I would maybe want in my prompt is to say something simple like, of the characters in the book, who did George talk to? And when you prompt it properly, it's going to come back and say, there is no George in the character list. So maybe you mean Jorge, or maybe you mean, Frank, or maybe you mean Larry. And so knowing how to prompt that is important. So when you get down to the agentic work, what you're wanting, a little bit different than the chat side, is you want the same answer every time. Yeah. If I'm asking you to categorize, say, the truckloads into something that I need a refrigerated truck for versus something I don't, you don't want it to be wrong. So part of that is going to be prompt that properly so that it can properly identify what are refrigerated goods, let's say. And then the second part you're going to want to do is you're also going to want to make sure that you're using the same model every time. Because if I use a different model, that model may reason it out differently and come up with a different answer. And so that's where we get into a little about deployment. And so let me give you 3 deployment models that we have available to us right now. We have public, which we've talked a lot about. Those are the ones you pay usually a monthly fee, and you're allowed X number of questions or X number of tokens, as we call them, to do. We've already talked about the danger of putting your private data in those models. The second way to deploy is to use those models, but in a different way. So you have a front end, instead of, say, logging on to OpenAI and ChatGPT or Gemini from Google, you're actually logging into your own app, or an app that is hosted by somebody else. And then they actually handle that conversation between you and the LLM behind it. So they're going to do this process where they actually are going to act kind of like a filter. So instead of your data going to Gemini directly, it goes into a different form, and they can keep track of the questions you ask, and they can keep track of what users are doing. So this gives you a compliance piece that you don't have, say, with the public. And so one of the terms we kind of use is shadow AI. If you're a company and you have people that are using their own personal accounts, whether paid for or free, for the public models of any kind, we call that shadow AI. You don't know what they're doing. You have no way to audit it. You have no way to verify its quality, or any of that. And this is obviously a problem for security compliance a lot of the times, or just business operations compliance as well. Then that other model is that intermediate model where somebody is acting as the kind of, I think of it like having, a window at a toll booth. You've got the operator behind the window that's ready to take your money, and then there's you. And the only way to communicate with that person is through that window. So now imagine instead you're standing there and I'm telling you, and then you're telling the toll booth operator what I need or what I'm doing. You then can be the filter to say, hey, you know what? You can't ask the guy that because it's not part of our policy. We don't allow you to do that. So that's another model. And there are providers that provide these, and there are ways to do that. So they're going to act kind of like a filter or an insulator, and they're going to give you complete compliance and the ability to audit everything that your people are doing. And so then instead of them logging into their personal accounts, they log into this application instead. And then the last one we've talked about is private models, where we're saying you actually run these models your own and yourself. In this case, this is the safest because you're not even uploading your data to that third party intermediate person that's standing between me and the toll booth. And so those are the three ways to deploy it that you run into. And I think depending on your needs and how you want to deploy it, I would definitely say as a business, you could consider the last two models. You definitely need to get away from the personal private account models. And I also want to mention that the large models that we have available to us, their goal really is to replace searching. You do a search now, and you've got OpenAI telling you your answer, or you've got Gemini, or you've got Claude saying, hey, instead of going to those web pages, let me tell you what it is. That's their goal. They want to know a little bit about everything, or they want to know everything they can to be able to answer your question. And really for agentic work, you need a smaller model. You need a good reasoning model. You need a good language model. Maybe you need a good thinking model, or a model that thinks deeper for the various tasks inside of your agentic work. And you don't want that to change. A really good example is recently, OpenAI produced their 5.0 model. And when they did, they disabled the 3.0 model. But a lot of people had written agentic bots or agents that were using the 3.0 model, and now it was no longer available to them. So it automatically connected to either the 4 model. I think it was the 4 model it connected to. And suddenly the agent workflows were not working anymore because the 4 model didn't answer the same as the 3 model. And so in that case, for agentic work, I definitely recommend that you have one of the other two. And I still say you got to be careful with the intermediate model, because if you were using OpenAI 3, even in that for agentic work, and it went away, it was unavailable, period. You couldn't use it. If you had a private model, then you're in control yourself. You're saying, I'm using the smaller model. It does the work that I need to figure out what are the loads that my trucks can handle and what's the best load for every truck. I don't want that to change. Even if newer models come out, bigger models, or smarter or better thinker models, whatever, I want to be in control of being able to put that model in place. So I would rather take the new model and test it and really use its new capabilities, and then put it in place in such a way that I have control over. And that is where you actually will end up using private models for your agentic work. So in my mind, if you're really doing a lot of agentic work, I really do suggest you consider the private models yourself. And there's multiple ways to do that. You can have your own tenant. It's not like you have to build it necessarily yourself. You will definitely need help building it. But there are, these are available. It's not like you're going to be starting yourself and saying, oh gosh, I got to download all these pieces and build this piece by piece. You don't need to do that, but you do probably need to consider using some sort of private model for your agentic AI.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And I'll tell you that some of the most exciting stuff that I've seen recently is because a lot of the people we talk to in our sort of client, our client base, and then just sort of friendlies that we have in the space, I can empathize with their position, because an IT leader doesn't want to be the bad guy that comes and tells marketing that marketing loves what they're getting out of a OpenAI model or out of a Gemini model, and IT doesn't want to go in there and say, hey, you can't use this anymore. We're going to take this functionality away, and we're going to force you down this path of leveraging a private model or something like that. And what I've seen increasingly, and even some of the stuff we've talked about internally with our own tools, is having access requirements to different models, both public and private, through the same platform, but segmenting those access those models by whether it's business unit, or whether it's by role, or whether it's by seniority, or whether it's by what type of data you're typically handling on a day-to-day basis. If you're handling a lot of things that aren't proprietary and don't have trade secrets and don't have PII and that sort of thing, then maybe it's okay that you go to this secure platform that still has the rules-based access elements and still able to log all your chats and do all those kinds of nice things. But it lets the users leverage the model they really like to use. And then for all of the proprietary and sort of secret data, then you pass those through, a little bit more stringent screen, and you say, hey, we're only going to allow access to our private models for this type of data or for these types of users. And then certainly to your point on the agentic side, that's nice because companies already have change management, practices in place. They already have sort of a level of comfort with how they deploy, whether it's code to their code base. There's already checks and balances along the way. And so this is like another thing that these folks can start getting upskilled on. It's like, okay, well, we're going to push a new model out into production. What are the steps that we have to do between now and that production date to make sure this model is going to give us the results and the outputs that we're expecting? But to your point, they have control over that whole process. And in the meantime, they're keeping their friends, the other users in the organization, happy, because if they're, just asking maybe to help write emails or design infographics or something like that, then they can still continue to leverage the models they like to leverage.
Yeah, exactly. It does insulate you from that change of the public models, not just in agentic. I would totally agree with you. But also, just even in the chat piece, I think that's a key as well. I still am asked sometimes, what is the best use for AI, or when do I know that I need AI? I mean, we're all told we need it right now. And there are some people that are just still a little skeptical. They're just not sure how to get started. So, you talk to a lot of different companies, and and they're all over. They're everything from the different verticals that you deal with is medical and construction and a little bit of everything, education and everything. So I'm going to ask you, you're talking to a lot of customers. Have you ran into anybody you would just say that really, truly one of these two forms, agentic AI or chat AI, just doesn't give me any leverage, or I just don't have a use for it?
Honestly, not yet, man. If somebody has, marketing, sales, operations, they typically can find use cases. And I would say, as demographics, you mentioned your kids and their experience in school, as we kind of continue to see the changing of demographics. We're going to have a whole new set of employees that are intimately aware of the value that they can extract out of these models and some of these tool sets. And so I think by saying, hey, you can't use these here ever, you might run into some challenges or friction there. But I mean, you mentioned construction. There's companies out there that maybe wouldn't be necessarily considered quote unquote high technology organizations, but they're leveraging these types of models. I'll give you a perfect example. I was talking to somebody recently, and they're a construction company, and so they do a ton of site surveys. They're constantly on site looking at the foreman's checking over work that it was supposed to be completed for the day, and then their job is to report back to the sort of home base and say, hey, yes, this job was done based off the specifications we all talked about. And it's a check and balance for a contractor that's in the construction space. And what they've actually started using is a sort of purpose-built tool for that industry, where now these guys can walk around the job site with their smart device, and they can, instead of having to take meticulous notes by hand and organize pictures and videos and so forth, they can open this application up. They can walk around and just plainly speak, hey, here's where this junction box is, and here's where all these cables are terminating, and here's how we handled installation here. And they're just having sort of a free spoken conversation. And the model on the back end is then organizing all of those notes into the desired structure that that they have put in place for so they can report to their clients, and also organizing photos and so forth based off of that job, based off that specific activity. And it was pretty mind blowing, because the feedback from this guy I was talking to, who he's in IT leadership for this company, he's like, man, I wouldn't have thought that the guys that are sort of out there in the field on the actual job sites would be the first adopters of AI in our company. But that's actually exactly how it turned out. It wasn't the folks in the home office that are doing computer work. It was the folks in the field that are having to that frankly are saving a ton of time by not having to go have a lot of busy work after the job site where they're taking notes and uploading to the right spot, but they're actually able to just do it in a very kind of easy way. They've seen a ton of they've seen a ton fewer whether it's grammatical or spelling errors, or just the thing that happens when you take manual notes. Sometimes you miss context, and so if somebody's able to just kind of freely speak about updates on that job, and the LLM is able to then contextualize those and apply those to the desired output or the desired format, it's made their job a whole lot easier. So the short version is, I don't see any organization that is going to have literally zero use case for some kind of AI tool or service. And then frankly, like I said before, I think that especially as who are kids today will be leaders in not too much time. Those folks are going to have come up through elementary school and junior high and college, all leveraging these tools and finding the right ways to use them. And so I think by having an attitude is like, well, we're going to turn that off. We're not going to allow our employees to leverage those. I think you're going to have a challenge in your hands, just in terms of making sure your employees are getting the most out of what they expect for their employer. So yeah, I think the other thing I would say is the benefit that I think a lot of the IT leaders that we talk to today that they maybe aren't fully aware of is that I think we are in a space where you can sort of have your cake and eat it too, where you can make sure that you have a secure, compliant environment, and you can give the users what they're asking for, and then you can sort of sleep peacefully at night knowing that you've done all of the prudent things in terms of locking down access to models that you don't that are not corporate approved, and making sure that your data is not accessible by the wrong people in the organization. And in the example we talked about earlier, where you have that was a question that came up from one of our clients. Well, I have a lot of sensitive data, and I don't want contractors having access to this information. I don't want to just have one giant data lake where anybody can go in there and quote unquote chat with my data. And so that I would say, a lot of people probably don't fully realize that you really can get super granular with access to models and access to data based off a lot of the platforms that we're seeing come online today.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the other advantage you get to going private, if you're gonna go all the way down and go to the private model, is that last piece called fine tuning. You have to think about an LLM. I think one way to think about it is kind of an employee, and it's an employee that you can talk to, obviously. And then we were talking about the adding data to it, which is a chunk of data or a chunk of documents that you give it that have access to. I want to stress that also. Believe it or not, LLM have what they call tools, and tools are pieces of code that an LLM can call. A great example is one of the ones that we have is a weather tool. So if I'm chatting and I'm planning my trip and I'm going to, I'm headed to Chicago in 2 days, I can just say, hey, what's the weather like for the next 4 days in Chicago starting on Saturday? And this tool, the LLM realizes, oh, he's talking about weather, he's talking about Chicago, and he's talking about Saturday forward. It actually connects out to a weather service, asks that question to the weather service in whatever format that service needs, and then it returns the answer to me. So it doesn't know the weather. It hasn't been trained on the weather. It doesn't know the weather or certainly the forecast for next week, but it does have a tool that it can use to do that. And it does that independently on its own when it needs to. And so imagine you have a tool that can query your own databases, that can query your own document stores, that can actually, if you're that trucking company and you say, I've got a list of all my drivers and their schedules and when they're driving, And when I say I need, I've got a big contract that I need 15 trucks to go here to pick up all this equipment, it could connect to that database and say, well, here's the 15 guys that are able to drive for you at that time. As just part of the regular chat or part of your agentic work. That's a key. And then the last part is that fine tuning, where if you have a smaller model, you can take your data that you have, that proprietary data that you're talking about, and instead of it being in a document store that has to be searched, you can actually add it into the model itself, so it becomes intrinsically a part of that model. So I love kind of the example of your construction. Maybe you're a construction company and you have 15 or 20 different house models. Let's say you're a residential construction. You have 15 or 20 different models about the house. You could actually build all the language of that model into the LLM. And so the way that works is you take the LLM, you put it back in training mode, and you take your set of information and you run through that same training process that it did originally. But now this becomes part of the LLM automatically. So instead of the big difference is now I have that employee, instead of giving that employee a bunch of documents saying, hey, look up that information in your documents and find that for me and tell me what you know about it. Now that employee knows everything and can correlate information and go, well, you know what, not only that model of home, but that model is very popular in the area that you're looking at, which that would be another document you would have to add. But if it's part of the information, the LM can just correlate it and coordinate it all together. So that is something you can do privately that you can't do in the public models too. So I think that's going to be very strong for agentic work, because you can take your agent and your LLM and you can focus it on your data to let it help make the decisions that you want it to, instead of hallucinating or making a different decision or all the prompt engineering you might need to do to get it to make the same decision. If you really limit it to your scope and say, this is the information that I want you to know, and I want you to make decisions based on it, then you can do that privately.
Yeah, and I think fine tuning is probably, a lot of people aren't even going down that path, just yet, just kind of going through what the value of fine tuning a small, or as I usually say, a SMEDIA model. I like the SMEDIA models that are sort of big enough. Yeah. And I think, you mentioned the tools. That's another area, because I think because Gen AI has been so kind of B2C focused that everybody is kind of like watching these big players and saying, oh, hey, did you hear that so-and-so has a new model coming out? And let's all go in there and test GPT-5 and so on and so forth. But silent, you don't really hear unless you're, talking with people like you every day about this massive ecosystem of tools that are coming online that people are just busy away building out. And I think a lot of people don't think about that because they're inherent in the big public models. You don't realize that when you ask what the weather forecast is going to be into, an OpenAI model or a Gemini model, that it's doing the same thing that you just mentioned. It's leveraging these tools to call out to some kind of weather tool in that use case. That's all happening on the background. And so people, I think, just general users, even power users, a lot of times don't realize that there's a sort of arms race to how good can we get these tools that LLMs are going to leverage, down to getting really, really specialized tools that if you know enough about them and you kind of understand how they work and you are building out an agentic workflow, those tools become extremely relevant. Which ones you use and exactly what functions you have them calling out. So I really appreciate you saying that as well. So Mike, again, thanks for getting together today. Always love the opportunity to pick your brain, and I take these opportunities extremely seriously, just to sponge up as much intel as I possibly can while I'm having these conversations with you. So appreciate the time, and maybe we'll do this again. Maybe we'll figure out a couple other questions that we hear a lot, and I'll bounce them off of you and see what you have to say about them.
That'd be great. I appreciate that. It's always a great conversation. So I certainly think it was a lot of fun.
Good deal. All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.